If you're a PlayStation Vita gamer and an action RPG fan, you should be very familiar with the developer Vanillaware. They made Muramasa Rebirth, which originally released on the Wii but was remade for the PlayStation Vita, and they made Dragon's Crown, which also released on the Vita. What you may not know is that they've been making games for PlayStation since the PS2 era. They only made a couple PS2 games, but one of them did get enough recognition to release for the PlayStation 3 as a PS2 classic. As if that wasn't enough, the developers decided to completely remake the game for all PlayStation systems. That's the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, and it is compatible with the PlayStation TV. Here is my official review of the Vita version of Odin Sphere Leifthrasir. And no, I don't know if I pronounced Leifthrasir correctly. The story of Odin Sphere takes place around a device known as the Cauldron, which was known for having unnatural magical powers that was directly involved with the destruction of one of the world's great nations. The remaining nations are fighting over this cauldron for various reasons. The Aesir warriors want control of it for war purposes. The fairies, known as the Vanir, want to keep it out of the wrong hands, and some other parties that come in later on in the game want it for much sinister purposes. Now, the nice thing about the storyline is you go through story arcs based around each playable character. You have a lot of their personal story, and you see them grow as a character in their story arc, as well as parts of the story that go in the overall plot with the war. So it's not all about the war, and you really do get to know all of these characters. The gameplay of this game can be described as a side-scrolling beat-em-up action RPG. Now that's a mouthful, but it's really what it is. You go through side-scrolling dungeons with beat-em-up gameplay, and there are a lot of action RPG elements as well. So basically it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up action RPG. Before we go into the actual flow of the game, let's talk about what's new in the remake. There have been a lot of gameplay changes, particularly the power gauge in combat not being used as heavily and not limiting you on what you can do like it did in the original version. Another nice thing about this remake is that there are two main game modes. There's the normal game mode and a secondary mode called Classic Mode. Classic Mode is a big deal because it contains the entire original PS2 version of the game. So essentially, Odin Sphere Leifthrasir is two games in one, the remake and the original. Progression through this game goes through character-based story arcs. When you start the game, you actually play as a young girl walking through a library with various books she can read. Each book is a different story arc based on the different playable characters of the game. You have one character available to you for the start, so you pick up that book, you read it, you play through the story. Once you beat it, you unlock the next character story, and you continue this process until you get through all 6 story arcs and beat the game. In each story arc, there are various chapters, normally 5, 6, 7 chapters, give or take. In each chapter, you'll progress through a different dungeon to advance the story. These chapters can also be toggled in between, so if you're in Chapter 5 of Fairyland and missed a key item or an unlockable skill in Chapter 3, you can just go back to Chapter 3 with the trigger buttons, and you can go and play that. When you're in dungeons, you're going through 2D side-scrolling stages with the goal of reaching the boss room to continue the story and go to the next chapter. The way you progress through the map is that there are various doors in each room that can go to the next area of the map and go through different paths. The idea is you need to go around and explore and find the right path towards the boss room. As you go through the map, each of these stages will be different types. The different types of stages are normal stages, which normally don't have hardly any enemies in them. There are rest stages that have NPCs you can talk to, shops you can buy items from, and portable restaurants you can use materials to make and buy food with. And then we have the battle and mid-boss stages. The battle stages have you locked in a room fighting off waves of enemies and then grading you when all of the enemies are gone based on how high of a combo you manage to rack up during that stage. The mid-boss stages and boss stages are just like battle stages in that you're graded based on your score, but instead of fighting hordes of enemies, you're fighting giant boss fights. Aside from the rewards you get at the end of each stage, You gain experience points from defeating enemies, and you get money and phosons. Money is used for the shops, mostly for the shops and rest areas and in your base between dungeons. Experience goes towards leveling up, which will increase your stats, which is key to using some of the high tier skills. And phosons, all enemies drop, and they're used to upgrade your skills and your weapon, but it's also for the food elements. When you go through a stage and you get rewards or enemy drops, you'll find a lot of plant seeds. You can plant these seeds, give up some phosons to let them grow, and they'll sprout fruit for you. Knock off the fruit and eat it. They'll heal you as well as giving you experience points. Some of the food is the easiest and best way to gain experience points to up your level, so you don't have to go back and grind for levels later on in the game. Now let's talk about the actual combat. You have various physical attacks you can use that can start a combo, but the key to finishing a combo or keeping a combo going is with skills that you learn. There are two types of skills. There are skills that use the power gauge, and there are skills that use PP gauge. The power gauge refreshes and regenerates every few seconds if you stop fighting, while the PP gauge will only regenerate as you fight through enemies. If you run the PP gauge down to 0, it might take half the dungeon to get you back up to full to use more skills. Whereas in the power gauge goes down, you stop moving for a couple seconds and it's already back to full and you can use it. The whole key to this is to learning when in a combo to use skills, but also having a balance between power skills and PP skills. I generally prefer mostly power skills and maybe a single PP skill register to the various button commands, but that's just me. I like being able to make the fight seem pretty flashy and to keep the combos going as long as possible. When you're using mostly power skills, that's not hard to do. Now let's talk about the one thing that I did not like about this game's combat. Boss variety is a bit lacking in this game. While every mid-boss and boss fight you go through when you fight is pretty epic and quite the spectacle, some of the bosses are repeated throughout multiple story scenarios. When you go through the story as Gwendolyn, you're going to be fighting at least a few of the bosses that you're going to be fighting again as Oswald, or Mercedes, or Velvet. The first time I fought a giant airship with dwarves throwing bombs out of it was pretty epic. The fourth or fifth time I fought the same boss in another character story arc, not so much. Now the final thing we should talk about is how long the game is. If you look up the original Odin Sphere on the How Long to Beat website, it claims that the original game is 37 to 40 hours long. I would gauge the game more at 20 to 30 hours. The longest any of the 6 scenarios took me was about 7 hours, and some of them only took a couple hours. You may not get 40 hours out of the game unless you go on the really hard modes, but you'll at least get 25 to 30 out of it if you're on easy or normal. As far as the presentation goes, I don't have anything to complain about. The artistic style Vanillaware is known for shines pretty brightly here. Whether you're playing on the small PS Vita screen or on a large TV with the PlayStation TV, everything looks flawless. From the character models, the battle effects, the moving backgrounds, everything looks great. And the final thing we should talk about is performance. If you've played the original Odin Sphere, you should remember that there was a lot of lag and slowdown issues when the original game went into combat. In the remake, you have nothing to worry about. The Vita version, PS3, and PS4 versions don't have frame drops or anything of the sort. The only time the game slows down is when it intentionally goes into a slow motion sequence as a boss dies. Odin Sphere Leifthrasir fixes a lot of things that really brought down the original game. My only complaint with the remake is the lack of boss variety. The rest of this game is a beautiful, fast-paced, and well-optimized action RPG that any Vanillaware fans really need to check out. Reviews2Go rates Odin Sphere a 9 out of 10. If you have any comments, feel free to look below. Leave them on this YouTube video, or head to my site at www.reviews2go.com.